Originally, The Simpsons was supposed to be little more than filler back when they were on The Tracy Ullman Show from April 1987 to May 1989. But the show would instead become a cultural phenomenon and change television history. Specifically, the show changed how families were depicted on TV. Traditionally, television families were wholesome and idealized. In contrast, despite being animated, The Simpsons were one of the most realistic representations of a family that had ever been seen on TV. The show received significant acclaim from fans and critics alike, but they did have their detractors, some who were very high profile and vocal.
Make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
Besides the leader of the free world, The Simpsons also had another vocal critic. With the success of The Simpsons, a number of TV series that had once been popular suddenly saw their ratings drop, as their romanticized depiction of the family unit now seemed even more unrealistic, made up of one-dimensional characters, stale storylines, and painfully obvious morals. By far, the most notable show to suffer from the success of The Simpsons was The Cosby Show. Based on the comedy of Bill Cosby, the series revolves around the lives of the upper-middle-class African-American family, the Huxtables. Given that the show was famous for its depiction of the ideal family unit, it was the polar opposite to The Simpsons in almost every way. Consequently, the success of The Simpsons set off an ostensible feud between the two dramatically different shows, as they battled for both ratings and cultural relevance. A battle that ended with a very clear winner. The Cosby Show aired between September 1984 and April 1992, consisting of 201 episodes over 8 seasons. The series is widely considered to be one of the best and most important sitcoms in the history of the medium. Unlike many critically acclaimed TV shows, the likes of which typically get cancelled before they even hit their prime, The Cosby Show was given a chance to thrive, which saw it grow a massive audience, so much so that it spent 5 consecutive seasons as the #1 rated show on television between 1985 and 1989. The series was one of the biggest television hits of the 80s, and it was more than just financially and critically successful, as it also had a significant cultural impact, with the aspirational premise of the series, and the comedy and characterization of Cosby himself that saw him dubbed America's Dad. The success of the show led to the spin-off series A Different World, about the lives of students at a historically black college, which ran for 6 seasons between September 1987 to July 1993, consisting of 144 episodes. But the show's success and social relevance would come to a crashing end in the 90s, with the arrival of The Simpsons.
Ay, caramba!
Despite the obvious differences in regards to humor and tone, The Cosby Show and The Simpsons also had a lot in common. When The Cosby Show started in 1984, NBC was struggling for ratings before the show shot them to the top of America's viewership. Similarly, after The Simpsons started in 1989, they helped do the same for the Fox network. Fittingly, in August 1990, it was announced that the two shows would face off against each other in the same time slot, 8 p.m. on Thursday nights. Publicly, Cosby played down the rivalry, and even jokingly embraced it. During one of his performances, Cosby spotted a kid in the crowd wearing a Bart Simpson shirt, prompting Cosby to persuade the audience member to give up the top, before putting it on himself. However, although he insisted that he had no ill will towards The Simpsons, Cosby was quick to suggest that The Simpsons had no societal value, unlike his own show. For Cosby, his show was always more about educating his audience, rather than entertaining them. In contrast, The Simpsons aspired to do both, and in their early years, when they were going head-to-head with The Cosby Show, The Simpsons succeeded with their objective, with critically acclaimed episodes that were made up perfectly of equal parts laughter and emotion, such as the pilot episode, Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, in which Homer is forced to become a department store Santa, Bart vs. Thanksgiving, the 7th episode of the 2nd season, in which Bart runs away after fighting with Lisa, and One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, the 11th episode of the 2nd season, in which Homer is told that he only has 24 hours to live.
My one, my love, my all.
That was beautiful.
Historically, tastes of the viewing public tend to swing from one extreme to the other, from era to era. So, it was inevitable that the fanciful perfection of the Huxtables would eventually inspire the creation of their opposites in shows like Married with Children, about another dysfunctional family that aired on Fox, and The Simpsons. And with the viewing public more inclined to embrace dysfunctional but more realistic TV families, Cosby was pressured by his network to improve his failing show. In the end, faced with competition from The Simpsons, The Cosby Show was retooled. However, Cosby outright refused to make the show more crude in an attempt to compete with the popular humor of The Simpsons and Married with Children. Like he had done his whole career, Cosby was vocal about how much he hated obscene humor, and condemned its place in society, no matter how popular it was. Cosby insisted that he had his show retooled, not because of The Simpsons, but because he wanted to tell different stories, specifically those that affected women, after he replaced a number of male writers who had left the series with female writers. The series also introduced a new teenage female character from a lower socioeconomic background. Again, Cosby stressed that none of the changes had to do with the success of both the Fox network and The Simpsons. However, ultimately, despite the changes, The Cosby Show just couldn't compete with Simpsomania, as the once great Cosby Show stumbled to an end. With the onset of the Cosby-Simpson rivalry, Cosby said he was not surprised at all by the loss of audience, both because of the competition from The Simpsons, and his own personal decision to change the content of his series to focus more so on women. And it's fitting that he'd blame women for the failure of his last few seasons of his show, given the kind of regard Cosby has for that gender.
Do you know anything about girls?
Sure, they're those things with vaginas in them.
Both The Simpsons and The Cosby Show addressed their rivalry. In particular, The Simpsons made a number of references to both The Cosby Show and Bill Cosby himself, especially when both series were still on the air, competing against one another for both ratings and the moral high ground. The Simpsons were never malicious with their Cosby jokes, as they typically took the form of lighthearted jabs, poking fun at the rivalry between the shows and Cosby's distinct style of comedy.
Pokemon! Pokemon was the pokey and the man is the thing with rap music, which gives them the brain damage.
Invariably, regardless of the nature of the joke, it was clear that The Simpsons always had respect for Cosby's legitimately impressive, culturally significant body of work. Then, in October 2014, a bit by comedian Hannibal Buress went viral.
I can talk down to you because I had a successful sitcom. Yeah, it was women, Bill Cosby, so...
With the renewed attention on Cosby's allegations, dozens of women came forward with incidents that spanned from 1965 to 2008. Soon, a large portion of the comedy community turned on the once highly respected icon.
I don't like the fact that you curse so much, and all the shit that you do, find a way to be more family orientated. Hey, bitch, come drink this. What a hypocrite.
Well, I just invented a new game called Get Blocked by Cosby. Here's how you play. You better hope there's not a 61st accuser out there. They're gonna have to try you in the hey, and tweet.
Suddenly, the Cosby references in The Simpsons took an uncomfortable turn. One reference in particular that seemed to have aged really badly is in the episode Saturdays of Thunder, the 9th episode of the 3rd season of The Simpsons that first aired in November 1991. In the episode, Homer realizes that he knows little about Bart and strives to be a better father by supporting him when he competes in a soapbox derby. The episode features a number of pop culture references. The title itself is a play on the name of the 1990 film Days of Thunder, about a stock car driver who gets the chance to compete at the top level. The specific instance of Nelson's cheating, when he resorts to whipping Bart and using spikes on his racer, is a reference to the classic chariot scene in the 1959 religious film Ben-Hur. Ultimately, of all the cultural references, arguably the most notable is when Homer goes to the National Fatherhood Institute, where he's given a copy of Cosby's book, Fatherhood. Over the course of Sad Days of Thunder, the show repeatedly ostensibly celebrates Cosby and his wisdom, as Homer reads through Cosby's book. One clip in particular was cited for having aged really, really badly, in the wake of his numerous allegations.
Thank you, Bill Cosby. You saved The Simpsons.
However, the clip, and the various other Cosby references over the run of the show, didn't age quite as badly as they seem, especially when you contextualize them, factoring in that Cosby absolutely hated The Simpsons, despising the show's humor and messages as its popularity reshaped the TV landscape and society as a whole, something the Simpsons writers and producers were well aware of, and were clever enough to respond to Cosby with some subtle, though pointed criticism of their own.
Oh, if he's as smart as he is funny, I'm sold.
Read the roll.
Of course, the overt Cosby references in The Simpsons aren't the only shots that the show took at their competing series and Cosby himself. There's also the character Dr. Julius Hibbert, Springfield's most prominent physician. Hibbert first appeared in the iconic episode Bart the Daredevil, the 8th episode of the 2nd season, in which Bart plans to jump Springfield Gorge.
This little boy broke his leg, trying to fly like Superman.
However, this version of Hibbert is distinctly different to what he became, given that he's missing his overall jovial demeanor, punctuated with his distinct, often inappropriate laugh. This is because the character wasn't originally based on Cosby's on-screen character. However, The Simpsons producers soon realized that the satirical potential was too perfect, especially when the two shows were put in direct competition with each other. Soon, Hibbert was retooled to be a very obvious parody of Huxtable, complete with his own personal collection of terrible sweaters, the likes of which Huxtable and the real-life Cosby was known for. Like Huxtable, Hibbert is married with numerous kids, with his wife and children sharing striking similarities with the Huxtables. Originally, the joke of having Hibbert based on Cosby was to highlight how inappropriate, and in many cases, how horrifying it would be to have someone like Cosby, with his distinct style of humor, working as your personal medical professional, especially during times when a patient was facing life-altering, or even life-threatening circumstances.
Maybe I ought to eat something.
Oh, I'm afraid your eating days are over.
Ostensibly, Hibbert is a perfect doctor. However, realistically, in a lot of ways, he embodies the very worst of the worst medical professionals. His conduct as a medical professional and Hibbert himself have always been suspect. Despite his credentials, Hibbert's given questionable solutions to medical problems due to inexplicable ignorance.
And while you're at it, throw in one of those polio shots. Yep, anti-polio.
Other times, Hibbert's objectively bad conduct is due to him being unashamedly corrupt.
Is it safe to eat that much food, Dr. Hibbert?
You know, I wouldn't have thought so before I bought 12% of this restaurant.
Also, Hibbert often has problems of what he should say to patients, sometimes making the situation seem far worse than it actually is.
I'm sorry, that leg's gonna have to come off. I meant that wet bathing suit.
Additionally, despite his appearance as a kind-hearted authority figure, concerned primarily about his patients' health and well-being, he is often clearly more concerned about money.
You do have insurance, don't you?
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful.
Hibbert is considered competent and responsible. However, it's been implied that he may not even have a legal license to practice medicine.
And guess who's been practicing medicine without a license?
Again, the Cosby references in The Simpsons were to get the comedian and his self-righteousness, but they weren't ever malicious. At least, at the time, they weren't intended to be malicious, but they were, and still are, often unintentionally poignant. In the 19th episode of the third season, Dog of Death, in which the Simpsons' dog gets sick, there is a scene where Homer throws the fatherhood book into the fireplace as fuel. At the time, it was a quick blink-and-you-miss-it in-joke. However, now, the sequence has much more meaning than it was ever intended to, much like many of the various other Cosby jokes throughout the run of The Simpsons. Fatherhood is indeed a real book, published in 1986, which incorporates Cosby's family-oriented comedy with actual fatherhood advice, based on the wholesome values Cosby ostensibly had. At the time, the book was well received. However, despite all the acclaim, Cosby didn't actually write the book. Rather, it was ghostwritten by humorist Ralph Schoenstein, known for his humorous contributions to various iconic magazines, including The New Yorker, Playboy, and National Lampoon. In Homer vs. the 18th Amendment, the 18th episode of the 8th season, in which Springfield enacts prohibition, the citizens of the town who rely on alcohol are alarmed, and it's revealed that Hibbert's wife, Bernice, is one such person.
Did you see this, Bernice? Oh my.
Although it was just a throwaway joke at the time, so little has been revealed about Bernice over the course of the show that any such little piece of information about her is character-defining by default. And the idea of Bernice being an alcoholic is something that fits perfectly in context with her representation as Cosby's wife. The idea of Hibbert's wife needing alcohol to tolerate her life with him inadvertently echoes Cosby's real-life wife, Camille, who once attempted to explain away her husband's allegations, specifically Cosby's use of drugs during his crimes.
Seen here in an excerpt, answering yes when asked if he was using Quaaludes for young women that you wanted to have sex with.
She reportedly claimed that the only explanation is that the women must have taken the drugs willingly, inadvertently implying that she of all people would know that the only way a person, especially a woman, could tolerate being around Cosby was to be completely wasted. Ultimately, over the course of the many seasons of The Simpsons, Hibbert would evolve into a fleshed-out character with personal eccentricities that distance him from Cosby. Furthermore, Hibbert would ultimately come to symbolize the corruption and apathy of the American health system, and the individuals who use it to enrich themselves to the detriment of society's most vulnerable. However, Hibbert's links with Cosby are undeniable, given that, while ostensibly epitomizing the perfect husband, father, and medical professional, with his level-headedness, compassion, empathy, and selflessness, he's in fact the opposite in almost every way. And, like the real-life Cosby, with his power and influence due to his standing in society, Hibbert is capable of, and responsible for, a tremendous amount of damage to numerous individuals without feeling even a shred of guilt. The Cosby Show was an era-defining cultural phenomenon throughout the 80s. Then, suddenly, in the 90s, with the show's ratings dropping, Cosby found himself bombarded with reminders that he and his show's messages, aesthetic, and humor were stale. Those reminders came largely by way of publicity for a new show in the form of t-shirts and magazine covers, all bearing the bulging eyes of various Simpson characters. It was inevitable that the two shows would take on one another in the same time slot. Having The Simpsons take on The Cosby Show both ensured publicity for Fox and helped establish the still-fledgling network as an edgy alternative to other channels. In contrast to The Cosby Show's idealistic family relationships, The Simpsons offered an ugly but poignant take on family life, with well-meaning but mistake-prone parents and misbehaving children. But the shows weren't as antithetical as they seemed. Despite the relatively crude humor of the show, the values and, more importantly, the heart of The Simpsons was on show from the very first episode, with a distinct warmth within the inherent chaos of family life. And from the pilot episode onwards, the show quickly evolved and soon perfected the unique blend of parody and sentiment. The Simpsons clearly did damage to The Cosby Show and Cosby himself. Despite his attempts to play down the rivalry or any personal bitterness, it was obvious that his deflections were as sincere as his ostensibly friendly, compassionate public image, something the Simpsons were well aware of and rightfully pointed out with sarcastic reverence to the sanctimonious comedian. Of all of Dr. Hibbert's characteristics, his most notable is his iconic laugh at the most inappropriate of times, although it was a thinly veiled shot at Cosby about how horrifying it would be to have an authority figure like that to be so oblivious in serious medical situations. The character trait would inadvertently come to epitomize Cosby's true nature, with the utter contempt he had for others, and the depth of suffering he enjoyed inflicting on the vulnerable, something he always hid behind laughter.
Spanish Fly was the thing. The girl would drink it and she's yours. Hello, America.